I always had a close bond with my two aunts, Aunt Laura and Aunt Monica. They weren't much older than me, maybe by a decade or so, and growing up they were more like older sisters than traditional aunts. Aunt Laura was the bold one, always full of energy and brimming with ideas. Aunt Monica, on the other hand, was softer, more nurturing, and the type to listen to your problems for hours without judgment. They were inseparable, always showing up at family gatherings as a duo, and I admired their closeness. One evening, after dinner at my mother's house, Aunt Laura suddenly brought up the idea of a weekend getaway. "You, me, and Monica," she said casually, sipping her wine. "We never get time together, just the three of us." Her tone was light, but there was something about the way she said it that caught my attention. Aunt Monica looked up sharply, as though she wasn't entirely on board with the idea, but she didn't voice any objections. "Just the three of us?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Why not invite everyone else?" "That's the point," Aunt Laura replied, her smile unwavering. "No one else. Just us. A little bonding time." The suggestion felt strange. I couldn't recall a time when the three of us had ever done anything like that. Family trips usually involved everyone, and this sudden exclusivity seemed out of place. But Aunt Monica, after a moment's hesitation, nodded her agreement. "It could be nice," she said softly, her voice carrying a trace of reluctance. Despite my reservations, I agreed. They were family after all, and I couldn't think of a reason to say no. Aunt Lara's excitement was infectious, and Aunt Monica seemed genuinely hopeful. As we finalized plans, I noticed small, subtle things that didn't sit right with me. Whispered conversations between the two of them, shared glances that seemed to carry unspoken words. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking things. In the days leading up to the trip, I felt an odd mix of anticipation and unease. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, telling myself it was just a weekend and nothing more. Still, there were moments when I caught Aunt Monica looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Part guilt, part sadness. Aunt Laura, in contrast, was upbeat and cheerful, acting as though this getaway was the most natural thing in the world. When the day of the trip finally arrived, they picked me up early in the morning. Aunt Laura drove, talking animatedly about all the things we could do, while Aunt Monica sat quietly in the passenger seat. I tried to match their energy, but the unease lingered. Something about the whole situation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As the car sped toward our destination, I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just a simple family outing. Something was waiting for me at the end of the road, and whatever it wasn't something I was prepared for. The drive to the getaway spot was uneventful, but the destination was anything but ordinary. We arrived at a secluded cabin, tucked away in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and absolute silence. It was picturesque, almost dreamlike, but the isolation was unsettling. Aunt Laura unlocked the door and ushered me inside with an excited grin, while Aunt Monica lingered behind, her eyes darting around nervously. The cabin itself was cozy but surprisingly lavish. The living room had a large stone fireplace, plush furniture, and massive windows that let in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Aunt Laura wasted no time unpacking, humming to herself as she moved about, while Aunt Monica busied herself in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact. I stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be a bonding trip. By evening, the mood had shifted. Aunt Laura opened a bottle of wine and poured generously, insisting we all relax. "This is supposed to be fun," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "Here's to family and new experiences." Aunt Monica hesitated before clinking her glass with ours, her smile forced and faint. As the wine flowed, Aunt Lara's demeanor became more animated. She started sharing stories from her younger days, wild, unfiltered tales that I'd never heard before. It was surprising, almost shocking, to hear her speak so openly. Aunt Monica, however, seemed increasingly uncomfortable, her glances toward me growing more frequent and apologetic. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Aunt Laura leaned forward, her tone shifting. "You know," she began, her voice lower, Monica and I were talking, and we thought this trip could be an opportunity. An opportunity for what? I asked, the casual tone of the evening suddenly evaporating. To explore, she said cryptically, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. Aunt Monica's hand shot out to her sister's arm, as if to stop her, but Laura pressed on. To break out of our comfort zones. To try something different. Together. The words hung in the air, heavy and ambiguous. My mind raced, trying to piece together what she was implying. Aunt Monica's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Laura, maybe we should. No, Monica, Aunt Laura interrupted, her tone firm. We agreed. This is the perfect time. I stared at them, confusion and unease churning in my stomach. What exactly are you talking about? Aunt Monica looked at me then, her expression a mix of guilt and desperation. We wanted to share something with you. Something personal. Her vagueness only added to my growing discomfort. Aunt Laura leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine with a satisfied smile, as if she'd already said everything she needed to. Aunt Monica, on the other hand, looked like she was on the verge of tears. I felt trapped, cornered by the weight of whatever they weren't saying. My mind screamed for me to leave, to find an excuse and get out. But I stayed, hoping that whatever they were trying to say would make sense, if I just gave them a chance to explain. Instead, the silence stretched on, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of wind outside. It was then that I realized this wasn't going to be a normal weekend. Something deeper, something far more complicated was at play here. The silence in the room grew unbearable, and I finally broke it. What are you trying to tell me? Just say it. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't hide the tension any longer. Aunt Monica flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the table, while Aunt Laura remained calm, almost amused by my frustration. It's not that simple, Aunt Monica said quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. Of course it is, Aunt Laura interjected, her confidence unwavering. We've been holding back for too long, Monica. It's time. She turned to me, her expression softening. We wanted to share something unique with you, something we believe could bring us closer as a family. The vagueness was infuriating. Closer how? I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Aunt Lara's smile didn't falter. By being honest. By breaking down the barriers that society has built between us. We've spent so long pretending, following rules that don't make sense. And we think it's time to let go of all that. Her words were cryptic, but their implications began to take shape in my mind. My heart raced as I tried to process what she was saying. You're not making any sense. Just tell me what this is about. Aunt Monica finally looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We've always felt like we couldn't fully be ourselves, even around family. And we thought maybe you'd understand. Her voice cracked, and she looked away again, unable to meet my eye. Understand what? I asked, my voice shaking. Aunt Laura leaned forward, her tone turning serious. We want to challenge the norms that keep us apart. We want to redefine what family means. And we want you to be part of that journey with us. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. Their words were heavy with implication, and I couldn't ignore the undertones any longer. This isn't normal, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you're suggesting, it's not right. Aunt Lara's expression hardened. Who decides what's normal or right? Society. People who don't even know us. Why should we live by their rules when we could create something better for ourselves? That's enough, Laura, Aunt Monica said sharply, her voice trembling. This isn't what we agreed on. We were supposed to talk, not pressure. I'm not pressuring, Aunt Laura shot back. I'm offering an opportunity. For honesty. For freedom. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. This isn't freedom. It's manipulation. Whatever you're trying to convince me of, I'm not interested. Aunt Monica reached for me, her voice pleading. Please just listen. We didn't mean to hurt you or make you uncomfortable. We thought you'd understand." I stepped back, shaking my head. "I don't understand. And I don't think I want to." The air in the room felt suffocating, and I could feel the weight of their gazes on me as I turned away. My mind was a storm of confusion and disbelief. How had we gone from a simple family getaway to this? Whatever they wanted from me, I couldn't give it to them. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. Sleep had been impossible, with my mind replaying every word from the previous night. The cabin, which had seemed cozy at first, now felt oppressive. I could hear the faint sound of voices coming from the living room, but I stayed in bed for a while, gathering my thoughts. Whatever had happened between us, there was no avoiding the conversation that awaited. When I finally emerged, both aunts were seated at the dining table, their expressions heavy with emotion. Aunt Monica looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red, and she avoided looking directly at me. Aunt Laura, on the other hand, seemed calm, though there was a trace of something softer in her demeanor. Maybe regret, maybe resolve. "We need to talk," Aunt Monica said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was fragile, like she was afraid it might shatter. I nodded but didn't sit down. "I don't even know where to begin," I said, my voice edged with frustration. "What you both said last night, it crossed a line. A big one." Aunt Laura leaned back in her chair, her confidence noticeably dimmed. "We didn't mean to upset you," she began, her tone measured. "We thought this trip would be a chance to have an honest conversation, to explore something we've been struggling with for a long time. Clearly, we misjudged." "You think?" I snapped, my voice rising despite the lump forming in my throat. The dam inside me had finally broken, and the anger came pouring out like a flood I couldn't control. "You think this was just a minor misstep? Like I'm supposed to just sit here and pretend that dragging me into whatever this is was okay?" I shook my head, my hands trembling slightly. "Whatever you're dealing with, whatever internal conflict you two are battling, it does not give you the right to pull me into the fire with you. That's not love. That's not family. That's manipulation." For a second, the room went completely still. Then Aunt Monica's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face streaked with sudden resolve. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking but laced with an unmistakable firmness. "You're absolutely right. We should never have put you in this position. We let our emotions get ahead of our judgment, and it's no excuse, but I should have known better. I should have stopped it before we even opened our mouths last night." She blinked, as if trying to clear the fog of regret clouding her vision. "I was just so desperate for connection, for understanding, that I lost sight of what you needed. And I'm sorry for that." Across the table, Aunt Laura let out a low exhale, her usual poise cracking ever so slightly. She cast a quick glance at Monica, a flicker of irritation in her eyes, but she held her tongue. Instead, she turned her gaze toward me. Softer now, less confrontational, almost reflective. "We miscalculated," she admitted, her voice calm but tinged with remorse. "And I know that doesn't erase what happened or how you feel right now. But you need to know, this wasn't meant to hurt you. We didn't plan this conversation to corner you or confuse you. We honestly believed, maybe foolishly, that sharing this with you might bring us closer. We thought it might feel liberating for all of us." She paused, searching my face for a sign of understanding, but I gave her none. Her expression shifted subtly, and she continued, her voice more careful now. "In chasing that idea of freedom, we overlook something crucial. Your perspective, your comfort, your trust. We didn't stop to ask how our truth might affect you. And for that," her voice dropped just slightly, "for that, I am truly sorry." I folded my arms tightly across my chest, my body instinctively closing off even as my heart beat loud in my ears. The air between us felt dense, and despite their attempts to explain, I still felt like I was grasping at smoke. "And what exactly is this something you keep referring to?" I asked, my voice low but laced with sharp frustration. Because all I got last night were fragments, vague statements dressed up as truth and implications that left me more unsettled than enlightened. If you wanted to be honest, then be honest. Say it plainly. Aunt Monica's lips parted, but she hesitated, the weight of my words visibly landing on her. Her fingers twisted together nervously on the tabletop, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not easy to explain," she said, with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her before. "This isn't about one single thing, not really. It's a feeling that's been growing for years. A restlessness. A sense that we've been living under masks, playing roles that don't fit us anymore. Roles expected by family, by society, even by each other." She glanced up at me, her eyes shimmering with unspoken exhaustion. "We thought that if we could finally stop pretending, even just for a weekend, we might begin to feel free. We wanted to create a space where we could just be. Without judgment, without fear. But we got so caught up in what we wanted, we completely ignored what you needed. We pulled you into something deeply personal, something you never asked for. And for that," she swallowed hard, "I'm truly sorry." Her words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. There was a tenderness to her voice that was impossible to fake. But sincerity, no matter how genuine, didn't undo the hurt. I looked at her, at both of them, and felt something inside me shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a sad acknowledgement that things could never return to what they once were. "I don't know if I can look at either of you the same way," I said quietly, each word pulled from a deep place in my chest. "This whole situation, it's changed things. Maybe for good." Aunt Laura, who had been sitting in steady silence, finally moved. She nodded slowly, her face unreadable, as if even she wasn't sure what emotions she was processing. "We understand," she said, her voice more grounded than before. "We crossed a line. We pushed too far too fast, and we broke something sacred in the process. If you need time or space or even distance, we won't fight it. Just know, we never set out to hurt you. That was never our intention." I didn't respond right away. The words were still settling around me like dust in the aftermath of a storm. The room was thick with silence. Not empty silence, but the kind filled with everything we couldn't quite say. And honestly, I didn't have the strength to unpack it. Not right now. Not when the ache was still so fresh. "I think I'll head back early," I said at last, the words cutting through the thick silence like a blade. My voice was steady, composed, but beneath that calm exterior was a cold finality I couldn't soften, even if I tried. There was no dramatic protest. No desperate plea to make me stay. Neither of them even moved. Aunt Monica simply nodded, her lips trembling as a fresh wave of tears spilled silently down her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't argue, just sat there with her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together was all she could manage. Aunt Laura, in contrast, looked away. Her jaw tightened, her profile rigid and unreadable, like she was holding in more than she wanted to reveal. I couldn't tell if she was angry, ashamed, or simply resigned. Maybe all three. The silence that followed felt heavier than any conversation we'd had that weekend. It was the kind of silence that said everything and nothing, all at once. I turned without another word and walked to the guest room, where my bag still lay half unpacked. My fingers moved automatically, folding clothes, zipping compartments, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. Each item I packed felt like I was closing a door, not just on the weekend, but on a chapter one hadn't expected to end this way. Minutes later, I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The cold bit at my skin, but I welcomed it. At least the air out here was honest. Didn't pretend to be warm. The forest surrounding the cabin was quiet, blanketed in a stillness that only made my thoughts louder. A part of me longed to believe that this was just a rough patch, that time and space might eventually mend what had been torn. But deep down I knew better. The bond I'd always cherished with my aunts, the laughter, the shared memories, the feeling of belonging, it all felt distant now. Fractured in a way that couldn't be easily repaired. Maybe not ever. I didn't know what the future would look like, whether forgiveness would one day find its way into the cracks, or if we'd simply drift apart, connected only by memories of what used to be. But one thing was certain. Some lines, once crossed, leave a mark too deep to ignore. And sometimes the bravest, most necessary choice, the one that hurts the most, isn't to fight or fix, but to walk away. And so I did. Not with anger, not with hatred, just with the quiet ache of someone choosing peace over chaos. Even if that peace came wrapped in goodbye.